It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are covering Last Exit, the brand new book at the time of recording by Max Gladstone. Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
I think I will.
Go for it.
So basically, imagine if you and your college friends, instead of watching anime or playing video games or whatever, went to alternate realities and battled a dark, shadowy thing called the Rot in various post-apocalyptic hellscapes. And then sort of imagine that 11 years after that, after it inevitably went about as wrong as it was going to go, Zelda, who has never gotten over her girlfriend getting taken by the Rot, is attempting to get the band back together. Also, there's a teenager and an evil brain-eating cowboy.
Yep. I have nothing to add to that, really. Well, we got so excited about arguing about this book that we forgot about our format. We should mention here that there are lesbians and wizards, and they're all the same person. And also there's a spectral cowboy that represents America. Yeah, so why should you read this book?
I think I'm going to have to do most of the heavy lifting on this one.
I'm genuinely curious.
Okay, so first of all, I think that there's a lot... I acknowledge that this book does not really hold together as a book. I think that there's a lot of parts in it that are either interesting or well observed. The characters are largely unlikable and not particularly pleasant people, but they feel very human and well depicted. And there's the occasional bit of fun writing, and there's the occasional bit of fun observation, like June's complete bafflement that she would ever have had a need to go outside of New York City. That again, to me feels like this feels like it is drawn very much on real people. The college parts seem like a pretty good depiction of college and how stupid people can be in college. And plus, if you like weird horror stuff, then you'll have a lot of moments in this to like. Mm-hmm. Also, there's lesbians. There's gay people in general.
Let's see. I would say that, there's a lot of there's a lot of ideas in the book.
Right.
You can, and if, for example, you have a podcast where you talk about the ideas that are in books, it's going to be a fertile field for that, or similar relationships with your friends where you talk about the ideas that are brought up in books.
Mm-hmm.
As to why you shouldn't read the book, would you like to go first?
So again, I enjoyed this. It is a big, way overambitious, extremely self-indulgent mess of a book. It is way too long. The interesting part doesn't start until you're like a third of the way in. And the ending, it kind of flops the ending. And it never really coheres. All right.
I would say that I don't even mind that it flubs the ending, because it's obviously the only way to end this
right.
Story is to cheat, and I've seen worse cheats.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because in case you're wondering, this is a big how we overcome, fear and death and that kind of thing book, and the answer is it doesn't make sense, and so you have to try to hang a code on it doesn't make sense and try to make people see it. My experience with this book is going to be tainted a little bit because it reminds me of stuff that I've written, and it also reminds me of my life, but not close enough in either sense for me to feel seen by it, so it feels almost like I'm being parodied. So I'm gonna be like,
right. And see, this is what I enjoyed about the book, was that it felt like some sort of very clever snark on the parts of my life where I made a lot of bad decisions, and so did all of my friends. And I'm cheerfully distanced enough from that to enjoy that.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that, but you aren't the fat nerd being singled
I was
out.
the fat nerd.
You weren't this fat nerd. But anyway, I would say that would you like to hear a formerly gifted kid in their mid-30s having a midlife crisis for pages and pages and pages and pages and pages? Because that's the main
but
thing
with like
that you're going to
shadow
take away from
monsters
this
and
book.
a brain-eating cowboy.
Yeah. There's actually less of that in this book than there is monologuing about the stuff that's making him sad about the world.
That's fair.
think
And the
by
monologuing is terrible.
And there is literally more
a lot
of it
of monologuing
than there is action. So that would be, I would suggest, I don't think this is a good book, and I think you have to do so much excavating to get to the fun ideas that unless you're really doing it for a particular reason, like, oh my God, you could literally take half of this book out and it would have been better. Literally half.
No, I definitely agree. It's funny, the book is not even that long compared to some of the things we've read. It's 386 pages, and that's including... no, it's not including the acknowledgments.
The audiobook is the second longest
pages.
one that we've done.
Which is interesting, because again, like, it's only 388 pages. And I mean,
it might be my problem with this particular narrator who really likes to take her time. I've learned to speed up the playback, but it's still very long. This is the same person who did Linguist Mages and Empress of Forever, in case you're
right, and the thing is, like, Linguist Mages was genuinely really long. But Last Exit's not actually that long.
It feels that long, and I think that's true regardless. It has about half of the action in it that...
For me, it feels that long until you get to the other characters, and then it starts to speed up.
Oh yeah, no, the first maybe quarter of the book is unbearably bad. And I don't really know why anybody would go through... I mean, with Your Good Self as the exception, I don't really know why anybody would bother to dig through it to get to the rest of it.
I didn't find it unbearably bad. I mean, if this had been an author who I didn't already know and like, I'm not sure I would have stuck with it through those first 80 pages. It's funny. You start getting other viewpoints on like page 80 of 388. So it's actually not even the first quarter. It just feels like the first third of the book because it feels so slow. But even then, I mean, I don't know. I was willing to wait and see where it was going because I know that Max Gladstone takes a while to get to the point. And because even though Zelda's not a likable person, but I thought she was interesting. And I thought that, and when the action scenes do show up, they're pretty good, tense action scenes.
Yeah. I mean, that's all aesthetic agree to disagree kind of stuff. I also would take issue with your sense that these are in any way well-characterized characters. They all have exactly the same internal monologue. Sarah and Zelda in particular are almost indistinguishable from one another, except
Sarah and Zelda,
except in their ideological commitments. But the way that they think, the way that they talk, the way that they behave is essentially the same.
So let's jump to the spoiler zone because I super disagree with you on that.
We also forgot to do content warnings, so here we go with those. Everything upsetting about the modern world is discussed at exhaustive length. Also, people get their brains eaten, and there's torture both on and off screen. And everybody's super depressed. Anyway, it's time for the spoiler zone. Okay, go for it, but like they...
So the thing is that to me they're such different characters because like Zelda has several things that she wants. Zelda wants to be loved, Zelda wants to be forgiven, and Zelda wants to be good. And she kind of understands that none of these things are true except the first one, and that's largely through her own bad decisions. She's really obsessed with rescuing people, in sort of inserting herself into situations where she's not needed, inserting herself, like finding people who are clearly sad and sort of inserting herself and upending their lives. And, she's been sort of roaming around the country doing this for 10 years. But, and, she's, her main motivators are sort of shame and guilt. And Sarah is angry all the time. Like, the only person that Zelda is angry at is herself. And Sarah
can I rephrase
really
what I said before?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I know that Sarah's angry all the time, whereas Zelda is depressed and hates herself and needs to fix the world, because they both say that a lot about themselves. What
Right.
I'm saying is that they have the same voice.
Oh, everybody in the book has the same voice. Yes.
Yes,
But
that's
the thing
my
is
point.
that-
You can't
Right, because
you
they're
can't say
all-
that the characters are good if they all have the same voice.
Well, the thing is, they all have the same internal voice, except kind of Ish, who's a little bit, or Ish or whatever, who's kind of got a slightly different.
Ramon's actually more distinct than Ish, in my opinion, but like,
I don't know. I think Ish's anxiety is so pervasive, and like sense of doom is so pervasive that it does end up overriding the sort of fundamental Gladstone-ness of his voice.
yeah, I mean, and we know that that's the main thing about him because he says it a lot. That's his trait.
Right.
He's anxious. Zelda's depressed. Sarah is angry, and Ramon is the closest thing to a real human being that we have, because his thing is I like to take cocaine and drive a car fast, but I know I shouldn't like that. But besides the fact that they have, actually, this is a thing that I thought of Utena a lot while I was reading this book, and it's like these are all duelists with the fatal flaw trying to revolutionize the world. IMO.
Yeah. No, they are.
And one of the things about the ending that felt cheaty was that Gladstone was trying to bring all the duelists out. Still didn't manage to make the fat nerd come out, but that's beyond even this break in reality, I suppose. When will the big fat nerd get to be the hero of the story? When will the big fat nerd ultimately triumph over adversity? Frankly, I'd accept it if the big fat nerd were a lesbian, as long as she gets to win. Yeah, no, they all have like a trait which is hammered upon, but they don't sound like different people. And when they talk to each other, you could just put the names in the bag and shuffle them up and come out with a series of pretty basic references that is all that they use to communicate with each other. Now, this can be a satirical point about the way that people like this think and talk. And like one of the, far as I'm concerned, the fatal flaw with their plan is that they're all STEM people. They didn't have any poet in their hit squad.
That's certainly a fatal flaw. But the thing is, it's funny, I do not find their voices nearly so identical. I mean, when it's hopping viewpoints more and more near the end, I never had any trouble telling who was talking.
Yeah.
And like whose viewpoint we were seeing from that. So like...
Well, I mean, yes, but that's again because they announce their intentions and motivations every single time we switch them, and then repeat that several times each and every time that we switch them. But if you talk about the way that they talk, the way that they think, nothing really.
I even disagree with the way that they think. The way they talk, everybody has that sort of quippy, like everybody talks like they're on, I don't know, a Joss Whedon show or something.
Yes.
Not that I've actually watched much Joss Whedon. That's just like my mental go-to for like quippy nerd.
Yep. No, I mean, that's a fair thing. Except these folks are slightly more academic because of Yale. Right.
So everybody talks like a slightly more academic quippy nerd, but like everybody is definitely kind of a quippy nerd here.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, so. I think that it's been established that I really didn't enjoy this book. But
right. It's funny
still...
that you're so focused on Ish being fat, because he's only fat in the college scenes. In the adult scenes, he's become like a bodybuilder and he's super buff.
Yeah, I know, but the whole it's a whole thing with him, the entire thing with him. But we can get into that. And we can get into it right now. So it's like of the duelists here, we have like the jury of the group is Sarah, who should really be above this, but is dragged back in because she can't let go of helping and protecting these idiots that she's with.
Right.
And Ish would be the sort of Toga Sayanji factor here.
Yeah, Ish is definitely the Sayanji of the group.
Yeah, whose whole problem is that he never got over having a crush on his lesbian friend from college, and is mortally afraid of death and the sure knowledge in the center of his heart that, oblivion awaits. He's also afraid of falling in love again, 'cause it hurt so much the first time. This is something most people get over in their early 20s at the very latest. But he doesn't have to do that, 'cause he lives in the incubator of arrested development known as Silicon Valley. Max hates Silicon Valley. We're very aware of this from all of his work.
Yes.
But like one of the particular things that I think Max hates Silicon Valley for is that it gives this person a place to run away to and not address any of these problems, and instead sort of go further into his neuroses. Also, it's worth mentioning that all of these characters have superpowers that are based on their coping mechanisms.
Yes. I thought it's one of the things I thought was interesting about Ish's arc isn't actually Ish himself, but is the I do think that it's a fairly good depiction, like Ramon's feelings towards Ish, I feel like is a fairly good depiction of what happens when, Silicon Valley eats one of your friends. With that sort of like a baffled frustration.
Yeah. I guess probably one of the things that annoyed me about this book was that it felt very midlife crisis-y to me, as I mentioned, but it also sort of led me to the understanding that I've already had mine.
Right.
And which, that makes sense given the current average lifespan of Americans. And looking back at these feelings, and maybe this is on me, maybe it's an unhealthy way to look back at one's former things, but I hate it when people are struggling with issues that remind me of issues that I used to struggle with, and it makes me want to shake them. And be like, for fuck's sake. And that frustration is probably coloring. I think I should mention, objectively, I think this book is a mess. Subjectively, I found it miserable, but I don't think that those two things would,
Right. And I think the things that made you miserable, I found I really enjoyed.
I don't like being reminded of how much of an idiot I am and was. It's not nice.
The thing is, I enjoyed being reminded of what an idiot I was in college and, for like that long period after college, including grad school.
Yeah.
And so I kind of enjoy it because I look at that and I go, oh yeah, I can see myself making all of these, I can see myself making similarly terrible decisions. And so, this makes me feel less uniquely terrible about the bad decisions I made when I was younger and dumber. While also not needing to hit too close to home because I'm not, that dumb anymore or that young.
I suppose that's true. I think that maybe one of the problems is that it's not actually quite close enough for me to feel that way, because I had a lot of major idiocies,
Mm-hmm.
I think that, it helps that I got to watch Utena in college, because that might have,
Right.
if these characters had sat down and watched Utena together, they might have had a better time.
Maybe they would have avoided a lot. It's worth noting for our poor listeners that Isaac and I, we did not go to Yale, thank God. We did go to a different elite faux Gothic college, and we did not. And we did have a lot of dumb road trips, and everybody was crushing on each other, and lots of poor decisions were made.
We were at Carhenge at one point, or at least I don't think you were on that one, but
I went to Carhenge. It was my idea to go to Carhenge. I insisted on it, and everybody indulged me with this 2-hour detour on our way to Yellowstone.
Boy, was it worth it! Anyway,
exactly. But anyway, so we went on dumb road trips, though not of the post-apocalyptic shadow monster fighting kind. And, and then like all college social circles do, or like most do, that sort of slowly fell out of touch and had lots of hurt feelings between various people. And, and instead of getting back together to try to rescue somebody from the shadow monster, we all got back together when we were a little bit, roughly the same age as these guys, when they get back together, to instead do a group Homestuck cosplay. So, like,
which is a much healthier way to deal with all of it.
Yeah, but only because, the entire foundation of fighting the shadow, it turns out, is like fundamentally off.
Yes, I mean, and I guess that's the issue. It's like the particular collective delusion that they all suffer from, which I would say this is akin to, a bunch of chums from Yale going off to fight in the Spanish Civil War, almost. Like it has that feeling about it. Or on a more contemporary level, maybe being like Vista volunteers or doing Habitat for Humanity or something along those lines.
Right.
And like one person getting really into it and the other people sort of peeling away, and
Right. It's like that one person who goes off and does Peace Corps. And is, kind of is kind of angry and insufferable about it. So
yeah, no, there's a lot of real world analogs for this, which none of us were. I mean, because the thing is that we were all too either disabled or Jewish to be taken in by that kind of shit. But
or both.
Or both. Yes.
Yes, there is that. But like one thing I like about the book is that again, I thought that the college parts were pretty well done, but also I like that it turns out that the shadow, fighting the shadow is this pointless, you're making everything worse kind of endeavor. And this is really made clear from the very beginning to the very end, that like everything they do to fight the shadow is, meaningless at best and actively destructive at worst. And most of the time it's at worst.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like the first time that I had that thought in this book is very near the beginning, where I thought, you guys never thought to maybe take all of this effort and money and power and fix Mont Tempest's plumbing?
Right.
It's like, and there are a bunch of different, sort of different paths they could have taken that are brushed against. And I do feel that that's deliberate. That,
right. Well, I mean, the fact that it starts out with Zelda, basically murdering this lonely woman's only friend. And Zelda completely convinced that she's right. And, by the end of the book, it is made very clear that, no, that was just terrible. You can't, that actually just inserting yourself into people's social circles trying to misguidedly rescue them is actually an awful idea.
I mean, and that's one that I think that I can certainly relate to. I'm pretty sure that we all saw ourselves as saviors at one point or another. Yes? We went on a personal tangent here, which I've edited out because it was not very interesting.
It starts out already suggesting that this whole fighting the shadow thing is a terrible idea. And then you get to Ish, and Ish's entire deal with fighting Ish is like justified. And again, I thought this was a very well realized depiction of Silicon Valley, where people say that they're trying to change the world and, save the world. And what they're actually doing is just, horrible algorithmic software things that make them rich and make everybody's lives a little bit worse. And that contrast of like rhetoric and possibly internalized narrative with what is obviously the truth, that also become like, I thought that again, that was a fairly well realized observation.
Indeed. So what do we think the rot is here? I mean, I made a joke in a bunch of the jingles for the last episode about how the Enlightenment was a mistake.
Right. Well, and I honestly, this is why I bumped this book up to be right after Amatka. It wasn't because I wanted to do the book while it was still fresh in my head. I'll probably reread the book at some point. But it was because I think that it's in some ways grappling with a similar idea, which is that there's this, there's chaos and mystery and the inevitability of our own deaths. and we can, and that we've sort of constructed our lives around avoiding that as much as possible. But the only way forward is to accept it, even though it's not always going to be pleasant or good.
Yes, and I think that one of the interesting things that ties this cinematica together and why was good to do them back to back is that this one is all about, the failure of late capitalism, and that one was all about the failure of communism.
Right.
But it's the same void they're poking at underneath both.
Right, because this is it's actually about like the alienation of modern industrialized life.
Right.
But with an understanding that, it's not like this, but in both of these cases, it's sort of dealing with the alienation of modern industrialized life, but it's set in small claustrophobic communities. In one case, this tiny northern village, and in another case, an elite college, but like they're both claustrophobic communities.
Yeah, I mean, they do end up, road tripping across the entirety of America, but
they do. Yes. But what I'm saying is that in both of these cases, the books show that just having a close community can't actually counteract all of the, the malaise of modern life.
Right. And at least there is a near the end of the book, one of the characters, I forget who it is, I think it might be June, says that the thing that she's learned is that what comes from grace, the capital G. Mm-hmm. And it does suggest to me that the posited solution here is a return to a pre-secular mind point. I'm reading a book by a man named Charles Taylor called The Secular Age, or A Secular Age right now. And one of the ideas that is mentioned in this book is the idea that this is a disenchanted age that we're living in, which is not a term that he invented. It's apparently part of the social science, tradition about this stuff. But he posits then that we must think of basically pre-Enlightenment, pre-1500, as like an enchanted age, and that's the age that this book ends up in. Enchantment ends up leaking into the world, and that is like the happy ending.
It's a sort of a happy ending, much like I'm not convinced that this is actually a happy ending.
Right.
Because it's
the best option of exactly. Like the best of the available options is to let magic and magical thinking, more specifically, back into the world.
I forgot to mention, I think the ending's partially about expanding the kind of stories we're allowed to tell about ourselves in the 21st century. I think Max is as sick of my dead wife as a 9/11 metaphor movies as I am. Let's get some less boring alts that aren't all about our faults.
I don't know if it's exactly magic and magical thinking. I mean, for one thing, the only depiction we get of religion in this book is extremely negative, because the only depiction we get of religion in this book is like Southern Baptist.
Yeah, no, I was sort of interested by given that the main cast is almost cartoonishly diverse.
Yet they're all Christian.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, Sarah has the native religious
That's
tradition,
true.
but she feels alienated from it.
Right.
And one gets the feeling that if she didn't, in fact, she says that she probably wouldn't be doing any of this if she didn't feel alienated from it, like her sister.
Right.
And so that's sort of the closest that it comes to a positive religious idea. But there's a distinction to be made between religion and enchantment. Like,
I was going to say, I think that, because when I think magical thinking, I think like, people who are really into crystals and essential oils, and conspiracy theories.
La Tempest.
Well, a little bit, though. You know, I think you get the impression that she's somewhat, you know, that she's got some sort of, you know, religious tradition to draw back on. But yeah, actually, for that matter,
it's every religious tradition she draws on, though.
She draws on every religious tradition, and you notice that she's not an entirely positive figure either. I mean, you know, the fact that she's got this, like, she's got some incredibly racist cartoon Indian statuaries and things is part of her invented religious
also,
tradition.
we never get to meet her, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if he shied away from the challenge of writing a character like that in a way that wouldn't come across as racist.
Yeah, possibly. But I think it's also that she looms so large in Zelda's mind that actually seeing her would kind of burst that bubble.
True.
But she, but you know, so that's why I don't actually think that this is necessarily about magic. I really think that it's about, like, I really think it's about accepting our mortality. And that you can do, and that there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. You can do that through through a religious tradition or a spiritual tradition. You can do that through art. You can do that through drugs, whatever. But like, the idea is that you need to accept your own mortality as opposed to trying to escape it or trying to defeat it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely the way that Ish, if he had survived this, would couch that. But I think that they would probably all have different things that they're trying to overcome. I don't think they all fear death in the same way. Like, I don't think that's Sarah's prime motivator. I think Sarah's prime motivator is her alienation from...
Right. So Sarah fears the death of, you know, of the people that she loves, or even, you know, that she likes, or even that she doesn't like but she feels responsible for.
And Ramon is like essentially afraid of hope. And you know, Zelda is afraid of the end of the world.
Well, Zelda's also afraid of being, like, Zelda's afraid of shame and of being seen. The thing that terrifies Zelda the most. Yeah, and like Zelda's thing is that, you know, she came out once, and it was, even though it was successful, it was this, you know, incredibly difficult, emotionally wrenching, huge dramatic thing. And then she's kind of faced with the idea that she's going to have to keep coming out again and again and again, because being queer means you have to keep coming out again and again and again for the rest of your life. And, you know, and that's what leads to her rupture with Sal, is that, you know, she can't deal with the internalized shame of other people judging her for being gay.
Sure. So, but that's sort of the void has different names that the various duelists / characters give to it in this case.
Fair.
In much the same way that the desirable thing has different names for the people in Utena. But I think that you're right, and that the idea is finding a trick of thought that makes it possible to live without being overwhelmed with terror. Regardless of what that terror is. So you could even just call it overcoming trauma. Because that's sort of what Zelda has been spending the last 10 years trying to do.
And in the worst possible way.
In the worst possible way, exactly. And that dovetails with their coping mechanism superpowers, which, you know, help them survive this path, but don't nudge them off of the path onto the path that they are supposed to be on. That's made very literal with Ramon, who is like, I'm turning left, you know, at the
yes.
At the end.
Yes, he has magical driving powers. But, you know, I guess maybe it's not death, but I think it's, you know, it's loss and decay.
Sure, yeah.
Which includes death, because everybody's, you know, afraid of losing something.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like, you know, the fear of, you could say that the fear of, like, really abandoning yourself to love in the case of Ramon is the idea that then your lover can be taken away from you. And
right.
Cetera,
well, I mean, also, as you said, Ramon is afraid of hope. And I mean, the thing that makes hope scary is that it gives you something to lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, and I mean, that, like, June's entire thing, and I think, unfortunately, June is definitely, you know, is one of the real failures of the book. She's just,
if they'd had their courage of convictions, Zelda would have tried it on with June. I'm just saying.
You know, I mean, I think writing a teenager and adults treating a teenager, like, you know, You know what? I actually kept expecting her to even entertain that thought. I expect her to entertain the thought and then rejected it.
Yeah.
At least internally. Like,
Right.
It should have come up at least internally.
That would have been a great thing for her to feel crippling shame about, and that's her favorite thing to do. So,
Right, exactly. So, that, and the fact, but it's also just, it's hard to write teenagers, I think. And
this teenager felt particularly,
she did not really, I think, get a distinct. I felt like she did not have a distinct voice to my mind in the way that the others at least did.
She sounded like she at least talked in a way that was slightly different from the rest of them, if only because it was even somehow slightly more obnoxious. But yeah, we didn't really get a sense of her interiority and her her knack being her desire for the rot didn't really work thematically either. I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, she was a bit of a she was the ball that was rolled into the field to get things moving, and then she had to be around for the rest of the book to help continue to motivate people to do stuff.
Yeah.
And to give Ish a black person to shoot.
Well, yes.
So can I actually I want to before I want to talk about the medicine wheel a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
What did you make of that? Before I tell you what I made of it.
I mean, I did feel like it was I felt like it was a little bit weird, that it was sort of let's put this sort of faux native thing in as this, one constant. But I don't know. I mostly just thought of it as sort of interesting world building. I admit I did not, it was not one of the focal points for me. So I'm curious to hear what you think of it.
Well, it made my young brain go ding, ding, ding.
Well, see, I was not raised by a Jungian, so.
Right. No, this is, and the fact that it exists in all of the different quote unquote alts, i.e. all of the different stories that they can conceive of. Mm-hmm. It's the castle where the Grail is. You visit it once when you're a kid and you leave fucked up, and then you visit it again as an adult prepared to answer the right question. That's part of Jung's idea of male individuation, which as we often do with Jung, we're throwing out all of how sexist he was to to allow everybody to do the same thing. But yeah, no, that felt like that was the way that I made sense of that, particularly because of the way that it asks you, what do you seek? Like the question that it asks you in the Jungian story is, who does the Grail serve? Like you have to go to the source of power in the world with a true intention unclouded by your neuroses of why you're there and what you want. And I think that's what this was doing. We were doing a sort of a Thousand Faces Campbell kind of thing with that. And I liked that because obviously I would. That's where I thought that came from.
No, I'm willing to buy that.
Cool.
I mean, there's definitely drawing on, the characters are definitely drawing on some Arthurian legend, because they do go off then to try to rescue a princess in a castle, and like they do with every other attempt to rescue people, screw it all up.
Yeah. Whenever I hear Elsinore, I think of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. And so that was I was waiting for references to that there and was somewhat disappointed. Yeah, but it is the same idea. Yeah, no, I mean Elsinore is always going to be a charnel house, but I guess that's the nickname that they gave to it rather than what it was actually called.
Right.
But anywho, do you have any other notes about specific stuff that you want to make before I get into more complaints?
Again, I thought one of the things that I thought was about the sort of, I really did like the progression of making it increasingly clear that the rot is not inherently good, but that battling the rot is bad. Where it starts with Zelda doing this thing that that she thinks is right and she's very self-righteous about, but is just ruining somebody's life, and that you get and you get some hints about what's going, how they screwed things up with the castle, and you meet Ish and the fact that he's helped create the modern surveillance state because that's his way of fighting the rot. And then I like that there's the one thing that they did right, that where they really rescued somebody and they set everything up and they got it right, and they go back and it is even worse than it was before they came.
Yeah. I think that there are several more or less clunky geopolitical metaphors going on in this book as well. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem with this book is that there was a lot going on.
This book could lose about a quarter to a third to half, depending on who you ask, of its length. And
its
really
metaphors could also lose some.
It could definitely benefit from a similar pruning of its metaphors. Yes.
Yeah, but there's a whole separate narrative going on here about the failure of neoliberalism.
Yes.
There's that. There are these idealistic young people who go out and do nation building and then return to find it all gone to pieces, and they're from Yale.
Right.
Alexis had this old joke in their head all episode long. An Ivy League grad comes back to Tennessee, and a guy asks, "Where'd you go to college, son?" He says, "Yale." And so the man says, "Where'd you go to college, son?" And the time frame is about right. 9/11 happened while they were in high school. They're a little bit younger than we are.
Right.
And that brings me actually to the thing about the book that I found the most laughable.
So I still have more notes, but let's we can switch into your.
It's just related.
No, I want to hear it. Yeah.
It's the MAGA hat metaphor.
Oh yeah.
I want to put my hands on his shoulder gently and be like, how zombie apocalypse shit is all racist? It doesn't work if you just turn it around and push it in the other direction, man. You can't just reuse the same trope going the other way with this hordes of unfeeling, people who have succumbed to the mind control of the American narrative.
Right, and part of why it doesn't
brain-eating
work.
Zombies.
Right, and part of why it doesn't work is because they're so calm. And the thing that makes the MAGA hats scary is that, they're like the ugliness of entitlement and rage.
Yeah. It's like it gets it wrong completely. Like the whole thing with, if I were to cut out one thing from this book, I would have a hard time knowing where to begin. But one thing that I would definitely cut out is the whole motel thing. That poor science fiction writer kid from the middle of nowhere who says things like the 911 and calls Sarah Dr. Ma'am, who gets to be the poster child for the good one out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by his mindless relatives and friends, who ends up getting, zombie eaten for the, because he did the noble and good thing. That whole thing just, you do no, wrong, bad, not correct. Come on.
Yeah.
This is the condescending bullshit that is part of what drives this whole thing.
Yes,
Please.
it is. So, though it is worth noting, yes, the author is dead and all.
Nothing good ever happens after you say, "I know the author is dead and all."
But at the same time, it's worth noting that, Max Gladstone himself was a Southern kid from a, middle-class background who found himself at Yale. So a lot of this stuff, I think, is actually... I actually feel like a lot of what's going on with Ish in particular and with Zelda is drawing on perhaps... I'm not going to say autobiographical, but it's then again the author brings up his autobiography in the acknowledgement, so perhaps I can say that it's autobiographical.
If we're going there, this feels like one of those books where the entire cast of characters are meant to represent different voices in the author's head.
Oh yeah. Well, to some degree, that's also true of the duelists.
Yes.
Right. Like
I'm not saying that's a negative thing necessarily. It's just like, yeah, no, I mean,
Right.
why I called this book listening to a man to an
Midlife
aging
crisis,
middle-aged man
yes.
having a midlife crisis is because like this is sort of feels like reading his internal monologue.
Yes. And unfortunately, this also involves way too many external monologues. I have to say, this book is a much better book read than audiobooked because if you read it, you can skip all the monologues.
Yeah, you don't have to hear for the third time about why it's bad that people are on their phones all the time, or what the crack in the Liberty Bell represents, or I also was just like, it's very strange to me, I guess, to talk about America as much as this book does. Like, I feel like the issues that are under discussion here are all global in scope, but all the characters locate, it's not the world's ending. It's not we brought about the end of the world. It's that the country is dying. We brought the rot into America specifically.
Right, but that is how a lot of people feel also. Like, most people in America have not been to other countries except maybe Canada or Mexico for short trips. And, part of this is American narcissism, but I think part of this is that, like, this is a book about America. And so some of that's going to involve, our national narcissism, but also that it's going to be concerned with what happened to this country.
Yeah, no, I don't actually mind the bits and pieces of American history. Again, it's like I wish any of this were new information. But yeah, like I think that does make sense, that, like, from within the context of the book. But that sort of brings me back to, I would have liked one of these characters to be Jewish, because
Yeah.
I think about my relationship with the issues that are raised in this book, and like the how all these characters have like the scales falling away moments when they realize how fucked the world is, and it's like, I was told at the age of 8 that I was Jewish enough for Hitler, and
Right.
I knew what would have happened to me if I'd been living there, and that gave me a sort of comme ci comme ça, it's pure luck that I'm safe right now kind of a feeling, which I've taken through the rest of my life.
I still remember being 6 years old and in the car with my mom, and my mom explaining to me Hannah Arendt's theory of the banality of evil, because it was something that she felt I needed to know even at the age of 6.
Right. So this particular progression is not one that I directly sympathize with.
Right. But part of this is the difference between a book set at Yale and a book set at the University of Chicago.
Oh no.
Yeah, one of these schools, I think, has historically at least been a lot friendlier to Jews than the other.
Oh Lord. Oh man. Okay.
I say this as somebody who, did
that
grad
was
school at a different
the whole 2
Ivy
weeks
and
of trying to read this thing was worth it all for that. But sorry, yes, I've yes, you say this is a person who has a graduate degree from an Ivy League school.
And also I work for an Ivy League school now, but it's like because I had this moment reading this book, like, where are all the Jews? And then I went, oh wait, these are all Ivy League kids. And I remembered that, like, at Princeton, there's the one eating club that's known for being the one that the Jews go to. Still. It's also the one where, it's also the one where all the gay people and theater people and Asians who aren't, super upward, who aren't, like, into finance go, apparently. This is what I was told by one of my undergrad.
But it's like, the whole point of this book, or of these characters, that they're all the people who felt alienated by being at Yale for one reason or another. Like,
so what's more American than a self-righteous left-winger ranting and being careful to check off every diversity box, and then just, like, forgetting Jews are part of America?
Oh yeah, 100%.
I think this is the second time that we've been, like, sidetracked by one of these books just complaining about, like, the anti-Semitism.
I mean, it's not.
This is not actually
overtly
anti-Semitic. It's just,
yeah.
forgetting.
Yeah.
But
you know, it's significant, folks. The whole story of American history, a role was played.
So I will say that there's one thing about this book. So a lot of the stuff about this book, when it's trying to comment directly on when it's just observing people in the world, I think it tends to be much better than when it's directly commenting on politics and the author is just like ranting because like save that for your blog. But there was one comment on politics that I thought it did well, which is that, you know, the college parts are set in the Bush years and the contemporary parts are set kind of are pretty much set in the Trump years. Like, and it makes you realize how much, you know, like how much of a strong continuity there is. That like we tend, you know, there's I think a tendency to see Obama as a break in this continuity. And in many ways the Obama administration was, but that, you know, a lot of the things that we were horrified about during the Bush years, like the surveillance state, for example, did not actually go away. They have gotten slowly worse, but we've just gotten accustomed to them.
Yes. And
like the fact that, you know, we used to be horrified by the Bush surveillance state, and now we carry our little tracking devices everywhere, is, you know, that I thought that was actually a fairly decent observation on politics. Unlike most of the rest of the book's observations on politics, which are all, look, I agree with you, but seriously.
If it had been me, I think I would have gone on a self-indulgent rant about people going from being concerned about the surveillance state to actively selling their own DNA to people, to like corporations, just so they could find out that they're theoretically 10% Irish, as if that was something that you could determine genetically.
Right. I mean, but it's all made up. I mean, like
right.
you are paying. You're not even selling. You are paying corporations to make up numbers about your you know, in exchange for taking your DNA sample and adding it to their database. But you know,
I mean, once again, that's for the blog. Don't put it in the fucking book.
Right, exactly. But you know, the thing is that like that's the sort of that's so patently obvious. But you know, like the observation that even nowadays, even if you turn off your phone, you can still be tracked with it. That really, if you want to escape the surveillance state, you have to throw your phone onto the highway into the middle of traffic.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's useful to remind people of that. It's useful. I mean, I think that like if you're not carrying all of the stuff that this book is talking about in the back of your brain at all times, I don't know who you are, first of all, but you know, it can be useful to be, you know, reminded of those things if, you know, and speaking once again as a Jew, if the time comes when you do have to get your papers in order and to make a quick exit, you know,
remember not to bring your phone.
Right?
Yes.
But that is this maybe. Let's see here. A couple of random notes. There's a bit at the end. Again, this felt very Lieutenant to me. This sort of felt like the you know, the badminton game before the end, when they all get together and sing songs before going on the end of the world. And
I love the badminton scene.
Yep, I do too. And in this one, they were having a hard time recalling the words to the Whiff and Poof song. And I can help them with that.
Oh, can you?
It goes, bright college days, oh carefree days that fly, to thee we sing with our glasses raised on high. Let's drink a toast as each of us recalls ivy-covered professors in ivy-covered halls.
That's right.
Turn on the spigot, pour the beer and swig it, and gaudiamo sig it, a tour. Yeah. I was upset that none of these nerds mentioned Tom Lehrer when they were doing that.
Yeah, but you know, the thing is, these strike me as the kind of nerds who, you know, have heard that reference a bunch, but never actually went out and like listened to Tom Lehrer.
Once again, you got to get a poet in your hit squad,
or like at least a literary studies major.
Somebody
who's like a comp lit major.
Somebody who's read some things other than Shakespeare and Plato, please.
So one scene that I liked was the scene where Zelda's back at home and, you know, is like has snuck into her hometown and is like hanging around but is too scared to talk to anybody, and Sal shows up and they run into an old high school classmate of hers, and, you know, Zelda is just like dying of shame that, you know, she's being seen with her girlfriend, and the classmate is just super nice about it. She's like, oh, who's this? Oh, how lovely to meet you.
You've managed to capture the voice of the audiobook narrator used for that character exactly there, which
Well,
I'm impressed by.
she's kind of a type. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I liked that scene because, you know, if you're Zelda, you read that as, oh, she's being falsely nice and she's going to tell my parents and my entire life is going to collapse because I've been seen holding hands with a girl. And if you read this as a normal person, you know, that scene, you go, oh yeah, actually not everybody you went to high school with was a raging homophobe. You just internalized like the most conservative values of your conservative town.
Yes. 100% true. It's worth noting that even in like the reddest parts of America, even in small towns, there's usually at least 20% blue.
Right, and that there's lots of people,
if not 40.
Right, and also that there's lots of people who are like, well, yeah, I mean, I agree with my pastor that it's, you know, that like it's sinful behavior and it's not good. But I mean, you know, the guy who does my hair, like, he's a sweet guy.
Yeah,
you know, I don't like, you know, like most people, even in the reddest parts of America, are usually willing to make an exception for, you know, their high school classmate or whatever.
This is another blog post, but the idea that most people have like political positions that are ideologically consistent with their
interpersonal behavior.
Yeah, or just like within a particular political stripe, you know, that it's all as cut and dry. Like the people who are like Republican about everything or Democratic about anything are the people who think about the politics first and then about the issues.
Right.
You know, and
right.
most
people are
think like
total
that.
mishmash, and you know,
Right.
and also regardless of your internal politics, the way that, you know, people often don't actually live out their political values in their interpersonal, like in their personal interactions.
You're not kidding.
Look what we're doing, isn't it boring? Editorializing about current events. These takes are so commonplace. We should have saved them, squirreled them away, and saved them for a blog, saved them for a tweet, saved them for a Tumblr post, not put them in a novel.
Anyway.
So this is, you know, I think that there is enough interesting stuff in this book that, you know, not only do I not regret reading it, but at some point I'll probably reread it. And I know that you are glad that you are never going to have to read this. Ever?
No.
Come on, we liked the other two, the other 1.5.
No.
You liked Empress
I
of
found
Forever,
Empress
I
of
thought.
Forever fun on the first try. Empress of Forever is
Oh, yeah.
instantly a much better book than this one.
It's a much better constructed book. Well, it helps that, you know, he had Journey West to create
As
the
a
plot
template
from.
to keep him on track. Yeah, no, that was very helpful. But yeah, no, I'm done. I'm done. No more Gladstone.
Aww.
Sorry.
But they're so thematic.
We've we've beaten the theme to death at this point. I want to read some good books.
Oh, we forgot. We were so busy talking about this book that we forgot the pre-spoiler zone to establish whether or not there were wizards and or lesbians. We
That's
need to go
true.
back and add that. Are there wizards? Well, no, but there's a cowboy who represents the American surveillance state.
Yes.
Actually, no.
They're
I
all
agree
wizards.
with you.
It
They're
was
all
the- was
wizards.
the- yeah.
They're all wizards, and 2 of them are lesbians. Possibly
It's the Empress
3.
of Forever thing again. This is all about wizards deciding
Right,
whether
and,
or
like,
not they're
the
going
thing
to be
is-
wizards.
This is actually the thing that, you know, this is part of what I enjoy about Max Gladstone is that he's, you know, willing to write lesbians who are unlikable wizards.
That is true. That's not the problem that I have with him.
Right. Well, fortunately, it's going to be at least another year or 2 before his next book comes out. And if we're still doing the podcast in a year or 2, then we can argue about it
we
then.
can revisit this as a concept. Yes. Here's the thing. What do you make of the fact that they're all weirdly sexually masochistic?
Well, you were talking, I mean... So, the author is dead and all.
Oh dear. No.
I'm not going to speculate on the author's personal fetishes. But no, I think that that's I think that when you're talking about all these characters kind of representing different aspects of one person, that is, I think part of it.
And
but maybe not actually
will...
authors, but not necessarily author self-insert. The author is dead, and also in this case, because the author is literally not dead, it would be creepy to speculate about their actual personal interest, but personal inclinations.
Certainly has an interest in that interest. Wants to dig into why people are like that. And that can be completely separate from one's own personal inclinations.
Right. But also just all of these characters are in love with torturing themselves in every other way, so why not also sexually?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. That's probably the deal. This bunch of born bottoms like searching for their misplaced top in Sal. Like she's the only top in the world, and they have to go and find her again. But anyway,
yeah. Oh, I wanted to ask, because what did you think? Speaking of like weird sexual things, what did you think of the whole extremely uncomfortable scene where the cowboy keeps calling Ish daddy?
I thought that was played for laughs.
It was indeed. It was played for laughs, I think, but it was also, but like it had that sort of ha ha ha, unless. Like,
yeah.
I feel like, it's funny because on the one hand, this book is really self-indulgent and, it like could use a lot of self-restraint. But at the same time, I feel like this book could have been a good book if either it had been more restrained or if it had been like willing, if it had been willing to overcome its own internalized shame and really lean into things.
Ooh, now
and not like cringe back and play things for laughs.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. Like, there is a reason why this book, despite being a mess, does not rise to the level of a glorious mess, in the way that, for me, Uncommon Stars did. And part of that is that I was at no point surprised. Like, I feel like if one had gone a little harder with the concept, we could have gotten to a point of abandon, which would have been interesting in and of itself. But yeah, it does not actually rise to that level. And when it seems like it's going to, it dips into another monologue about smartphones. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I think that pretty much covers the gamut there.
All right. So next up we're doing two novellas.
Yes, the two novellas with tiger in their title.
Yes,
which
that is the theme.
The thematic link.
Fireheart Tiger by Aliette de Bodard and When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Niveau.
I assume that's correct. I'm not sure. I'm looking forward to these because they're novellas.
So they're short.
Yes. And so stay tuned for that. And until then, thank you for putting up with my petulance about this particular...
thank you for putting up with this podcast, which is, very self-indulgent, involves us wrestling with our own internalized shame and a lot of monologues.
Yes, but it's not a novel. It's a podcast.
Right.
It's a
podcast.
Blog post. That's the place for these things.
Right. And also, we're only taking an hour of your
hard-earned time. Exactly. Not 22. Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye. Thanks, everyone.